Hey guys, welcome back to another episode on your property upgrading journey, and today we are going to talk about the 4 different types of residential properties in Singapore and what that also means for you as a buyer, and especially so if let's say you're planning to upgrade your property portfolio, then what types of residential properties should you be looking at? So just a very quick overlook in the entire Singapore residential market, there are about 1.53 million properties just in the statistics drawn from 2022. And so spreading this across the 4 main different types of residential properties, we have the HDB segment, secondly HDB private sort of segment, which is also known as your executive condominium, so your ECs, third one your private segment, and the last one of course is the landed segment. So why is it important to understand what are the different types of residential properties and what that also means for you? The very key reason is because your eligibility might differ based on the different types of properties, and if let's say your eligibility differs, then what that means for you as a homeowner in future, when you do plan to sell off this property as well, your buyer audience will also matter, because then again, this new buyer audience, will they then be able or will they then be eligible to buy into your type of property will be another key factor. So the very first residential type will be your HDB properties, and of course HDB is directly from government itself, and that actually makes up almost 80% of the entire Singapore market. So almost 80% of Singaporeans actually own a HDB property. And when we look at the HDB segment, we can then further subdivide them into BTO category, SBF category, and of course your resale segment. I think what's very interesting to note also, right now if you are buying something directly from HDB, BTO and SBF, you can only get 2-room, 3-room, 4-room, 5-room or 3-gen flat types. And if you want something that's bigger, or you want something that's a little bit more rare, which is also what we know as the executive flats, your EA, your EM, which are your executive apartments and executive maisonettes, your DBSS projects, which right now HDB has already phased out that segment, and of course your jumbo flats as well as the HDB terrace homes. So all these, if you're looking for specifically this kind of category of HDB homes, then that can only be found in the resale market right now. And if you look at the eligibility in terms of owning a HDB and what are the buyer audience, or rather what can you own. So if you are a Singaporean and you are married, or you're a Singaporean married to a PR as well, then technically you guys can go ahead and apply for a BTO or SBF as well, as long as you guys fulfill all the required eligibility requirements. And of course, you must not have also disposed any private flats in the past 30 months. So one of the key difference here is also, right now you're a Singaporean married to a non-citizen spouse, so you will fall under the non-citizen spouse scheme. Then technically if you're buying a BTO or an SBF, you are only eligible for 2-room flat types. And for PRs, even though PRs who are married, you form the family nucleus, you have held your PR status for more than 3 years, you will also not be eligible for the BTO or the SBF scheme, and you guys will then have to head on to the resale market for the HDB. For the resale HDB market, there's a lot more schemes available, so depending on your eligibility, so then again depending on your family nucleus, the manner that you're holding as well. So in the resale market, for example, if you're a PR married to another PR, you guys form a family nucleus, and you guys have held both your PR status for more than 3 years each, you also are eligible to buy a HDB resale. And for a non-citizen spouse scheme, similarly, as long as you guys are married, you are also eligible to buy a HDB resale flat. And in the HDB resale market itself, there are also a very good amount of grants available for first-timers. Let's say you're a first-time home buyer, really buying this HDB home for your own stay. Perhaps you just started your own family. Let's say you guys have the luxury of time to wait. Or then perhaps you can consider a BTO or SBF, because technically when you go for a BTO or SBF, you have to first ballot, get a queue number, select your flat, and then wait for the construction to take place, which may take 3 to 4 years before you can collect your keys. And from there, you have to fulfill either your 5 or 10 years MOP depending on the project you bought into. So in terms of the horizon, definitely going for a BTO or SBF will take a much longer time. But in return, you get something that's completely brand new, and you'll be the very first homeowner to move into it. And of course, let's say you guys do not have that luxury of time, or perhaps you do have plans to upgrade into the private property segment, perhaps 5 to 10 years down the road, then going for the resale option might make a little bit more sense, just because when you enter the resale market, you just need to fulfill your 5-year MOP, and once the 5-year MOP is up, you can then choose to sell this property away and continue on with your property upgrading journey. Moving on to Type 2. So Type 2 is your public and private hybrid model, which is also known as the executive condominium status. So the EC segment has been doing very well. In fact, most of the EC that has been launched, they are like 90 to 100% sold out within the first 2 weeks. So this is one of the hot favorite residential property types that Singaporeans love to go into if, let's say, they are eligible for it. So for EC, brand new, you usually buy it directly from developer, although you do have to fulfill all your HDB rulings still. So for example, you do still need to fulfill your 5-year MOP period, and during this 5 years, you're not able to rent out the entire unit as well. Unlike when going for a private condo, when you collect keys, you can directly rent it out if, let's say, you choose to do that as well. And for ECs, what's very important to note is that even though you're buying into a condo, you do need to fulfill the MSR rulings instead of the TDSR. MSR is also important to note because that affects your loan eligibility as well as your total loan capacity. And of course, if let's say you're buying an EC as well, you do need to fulfill the HDB eligibility in terms of your family nucleus. So let's say you are a single buyer, even though you might be 35, you are not eligible to buy directly from developer. Instead, you can only go for a resale EC. So in terms of the EC, brand new from developer, you do also need to form that family nucleus first. So of course, you want to check out your full eligibility. Feel free to head on to HDB website where they have the entire list of requirements and eligibility for you to take note of. And similarly, for those who are heading for the HDB market, do take note in this season right now, you are required to do up your HFE to ensure that you are also eligible to buy, whether it's going to be a BTO, SBF, or the resale market. Moving on to Type 3, we have your private property segment. And in your private property segment, we can then subdivide them into 2 main categories. So the first one will be your non-landed residential component, and then your second one will be your landed segment itself. So if you look at the non-landed residential segment, primarily you can find apartments, condominiums, or HDB flats, which of course in today's market, there are a diminishing supply because most of them have already gone through en bloc to become a new private property instead. Very quickly, for the private segment, technically your non-landed residential segment, which means like your condos, your apartments, your flats, all group of buyers are eligible to buy, meaning to say whether you're a Singaporean, you're a PR, you're a foreigner, whether you're married, whether you want to buy together with another person, you want to own the home under your single name, there is no restrictions in terms of that. So technically everyone can buy into this segment. And very quickly, if you take a look at the landed residential segment, then only Singaporeans, or let's say you are a Singaporean married to a PR, and you guys are owning this landed home as your matrimonial home, and you guys have the LDAU approval, then of course you can also head on to opt for a landed property. And just a very quick fun fact, I think most people will also ask what's the difference between a condominium and what's the difference between an apartment. So the main difference according to URA is just really in terms of the site area. So for flats, also known as like your apartments, perhaps those boutique projects, and we also see them a lot in the D15 or the Potong Pasir area. So the minimum site area is just 1,000 square meters, whereas if let's say a developer wants to build a project on a piece of land to have that condominium status, then it needs to sit on a land size of at least 4,000 square meters and above. And the key reason is because condominiums are supposed to have more common facilities for the residents to enjoy. And it's very important for us to also understand the supply and demand in terms of the residential properties in Singapore. Very simply, if you take a look at the economics of how the property market works as well, assets with a higher demand, right? So anything with a higher demand and a lower supply, technically price should increase. So if we relate that back to the property segment as well, assets with a higher demand and a lesser supply, it should appreciate higher in value. And we take a look at the second category, assets with a higher supply, however perhaps enjoy a lower demand. In that scenario, it's not to say that the property will not make any money or will not be able to see any gains. However, the growth will be slower, so that's also why this particular segment will appreciate slower in value. So this is important for you to take note, especially so if the property decision is purely based for investment or purely based for capital appreciation. Then it's very important to ensure that you buy into the right type of property so that you can really fully maximize the gains, be it whether it's a bull market or be it whether it's a bear market. So let's just take a look. First of all, we have to understand where the demand is coming from in terms of Singapore landscape. So of course, our demand comes from within ourselves. In fact, Singapore has a very high ownership rate. So 9 out of 10 Singaporeans all do own a home. So that also shows that Singaporeans love to own a home, and that's really where our demand is mostly coming from in terms of home ownership. And in 2030, governments have plans to increase our population. If you have read up on the white population paper as well, we are projected to have almost 7 million population, with about 3.8 million to be citizens, while the remaining to be non-residents, so about 2.5 million. It's important for us to understand what's the percentage of citizens as well as what's the percentage of non-residents and what's the percentage of PRs, because as we take a look earlier before, different type of properties, different groups of eligibility and different group of buyers may enter into the market. So now let's take a look at our supply, which is very much the main 4 residential properties that we are talking about today. So as we can see from this chart, HDB owns about 74% of the market share, so very close to almost 80% right now. We have about 1.215 million HDB units in the market alone. And for the private non-landed segment, we have excluded ECs for that. We have about 318,000, so you can already see that takes up only just about 19% of the entire market share. So the supply here is really limited. And for ECs, they take up just about 34,000. Of course, this is considering just EC status right now. Those that have already privatized will then be moved into the private non-landed residential category. And for private landed, so this is one of the most scarce supply and that has been stagnant for the longest time in the Singapore market, which is your landed market, just sitting about 4% of the entire market share. So that also shows how limited the supply is in terms of the private residential market. If you just take a look at your apartments, condominiums plus your landed, excluding a HDB, that only takes up about 25% at max of the entire Singapore market. So if we go back to our demand and supply understanding and how price is driven from that, what that means for you as a buyer today as well, if let's say you are someone who's planning to go for something that perhaps have a stronger or a more aggressive appreciation in the short-term market, then the condo segment will be one very good area for you to dive deeper into. The landed segment is also great because even though the number of people who are eligible to buy into are limited by Singaporeans only, unlike the condo segment, the key difference here is that the landed supply is very, very niche, just about 4 to 5% of the entire Singapore market. So it has already a restricted supply from the start. And in fact, if you take a look at the graphs, for at least the past 10 years, the landed supply is not increasing in Singapore. And in fact, governments has no plans to build any more landeds unless it's subdivided from the current residential land plots. Hence, the demand here is still very strong. So the key takeaway here is, let's say you are planning to dive into the next home as part of your property journey in terms of your portfolio growth, or you're someone who wants to see a little bit more capital appreciation, then my suggestion is to dive deeper into the condo segment or the landed market. And of course, one key takeaway is to always invest in a segment that has a limited supply yet with a very strong demand, so that we ensure, let's say 5 to 10 years down the road, you do plan to exit the market and you do want to see some levels of capital appreciation. That is very important to understand where your demand is coming from as well as what's available in terms of the supply in the market for you to make a more informed decision. And of course, there are also a lot more other factors to consider when you're choosing your first home or choosing your next home in terms of an investment standpoint as well. So that's all we have for today's episode as well. My name is Caline Leong and we'll see you in the next one. level it's at and what will be the group mix to Forget how to form my words, then you suddenly appear.